живуть віки, як переможний дух, як полум'я війни. Герої не вмирають, не гине справа їх, бо прапор підіймають руки молодих. Герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси. Легенди не вмирають, бо пам'ять не помре. Пройде 100 поколінь, а згадка все живе. Герої не вмирають, вмирають і вороги, що стали проти правди, проти істини. Герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси. Легенди не вмирають, бо не закінчений, де сили світла йдуть напроти темряви. Герої не вмирають, коли настане час, вони повстануть знову на бій в останній раз. Герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси, герої моєї раси.
свій виступ на Олімпійських іграх вона присвячує тим, хто віддає.
Життя це мить, яка минає швидко. Не встигнеш обернутись, як старість вже близько. Проживи цю мить яскраво, як останній вечір. Збирай безцінні спогади, а не брендові речі. Я хочу пережити ще раз ці моменти яскраві.
Братан.
And hello everyone, let me adjust my volume downward here just a little bit. Yeah, so right now, this is our second try at the show. If there are bitrate issues, apologies guys, this is about the best I can do after yesterday. We'll just have to power through it, and if this is caught on a upload, then that's how I'll have to go. All right, let me check my show notes here. For today, it looks like it's just going to be me for the majority of the show, it sounds like. And we might get Alex on later. He is currently disposed with some family entanglements. D will be on later tonight at 9 p.m. Western time, so he will be doing the shit show later. So I do have a time deadline, I guess, but I don't remember the last time it went 5 hours. But we'll try to keep it underneath that. Let me think here. Let me look at my notes. Yeah, so again, had internet issues yesterday. Currently, right now, I'm just kind of monitoring everything else in the background. Looks like it's mostly stable. There are some wheels of death going on, but it's about the best I can do. Yeah, we won't be covering the Israeli war today, at least the Gazan war. Talked to Alex last week a little bit about the possible Hezbollah war, if possible. Might have him work on that while I focus on the Ukraine war. Just probably because that would be more dynamic and more relevant than the war in Gaza at this point, if not a wider regional war. Let me see here. I'll just check my notes again here. Yeah, but the two big important things to talk about with the shit going on in Israel. The two assassinations. There was the Hamas #1 political Politburo guy, and then their #2 Hezbollah military guy, I guess. Um, don't know how that's really going to affect things with Hezbollah. I imagine that it would probably just shrug their shoulders and move on, seeing as how they have 100,000 people to pull from. But with the Hamas negotiations right now for a ceasefire, what's interesting about that though is that forgot his name, Ismail maybe. Anyway, so let's talk about the death first. So there's speculation it was either a bomb detonated in his guest house while in Tehran itself. Story with that is that it was possibly there for about 2 months, which would go to show how lax the IRGC is with security and how much Mossad is trying to still fuck up the internal workings of Iran. The other possibility is that there was an airstrike over Tehran, and neither look good. What with Mossad's failure in October 7th, maybe it's a PR thing to get in there for them. I don't know if that's valid enough for them to say they did it. We've seen them use airstrikes many times. Last time was a high-profile strike. It was in Damascus, where they killed a number of Iranian generals. But yeah, that's what I could say right now with what's going on over there with his deaths. But what was happening in the political process for the ceasefire is that supposedly he was coming through on negotiating back phase 1 of the let me think here. There was a timed withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, right? And he was supposedly giving ground on how long Israel would stay in country. What he was originally saying was that they would have to withdraw all their forces within phase 1. I don't remember the timelines for all that, but it sounds like he was willing to let them have an extended stay, at least in the urban areas in Gaza, that sort of thing, which shows that there was some progress happening in the ceasefires. But now that he's dead, they're probably going to have to start from square one, and we don't know who's going to take over his spot as the Politburo chief for Hamas. So it could be worse, could be bad for them. Don't know. It could be a military commander. And my understanding is that this is based off reporting from ISW, is that the military commanders within Gaza itself were asking for some sort of ceasefire, any sort of ceasefire, because their forces are exhausted. They're still reconstituting, still fighting, that sort of thing. But there is still a demand for some sort of cease in hostilities. We'll see. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's have to keep an eye on it. So that's the Israel stuff. What else we got? Yeah, so the interview last week, that was also pushed out to next week, actually. Last week, out 2 weeks from that date. So next week we should have a special guest on to talk to you guys about some of his travels around the world. He was in Soldier of Fortune magazine twice when that was still around. He's been to Southeast Asia, Africa, the Balkans, some other areas. But yeah, you probably all know him fairly well if you are in the North American continent. But yeah, and I'm sorry guys, looks like they're still having problems on the Odyssey side of things. Hopefully it stables out. But again, just pressing on here. What else we got? Yeah, so about tonight's show. So we're going to do the normal thing. We're going to be covering the last 2 weeks, though. I still have it in a succinct format for us to kind of digest everything, and then we'll roll into about 40 to 50 videos of combat footage on the second half, which has been curated by Alex. And yeah, so about the brief, though. I've read a few reports last week covering numbers of recruitment for the Russians and Ukrainians, losses. But one in particular that I really wanted to kind of deep dive into was a report. I think it was by Rusi. Wasn't able to find it before the show because I would have liked to have gone through it with you guys, but I'll find it next week when I have the time for resources for it. Um, and I'll probably do a separate upload for it, but it was a report on the underground partisan resistance of the Ukrainians behind Russian lines. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, especially with what's going on in Britain right now. There is some interesting ways urban and rural guerrillas, if you want to call them that, resistance fighters, when you call them, find ways of working around systems of occupation. Um, yeah, so I would just find that in context to be interesting, especially what we're seeing going on with also the IRA and the Ulster loyalists uniting themselves against the UK government at this point, and then Ukrainians behind Russian lines. Um, Anyway, it's just parallels in history. Anyway, you guys know where I'm coming from with all this, though, but it's especially relevant again due to recent events. Um, what else? Yeah, Alex is not here at the moment, so yeah, we'll get any input from him once he comes on the show. Yeah, White Boy Summer says I'm going to wait. I'm going to be 20 seconds behind the live because it reduces buffering issues. Yeah, for sure, bud. Yeah, again, I'll try to respond to anything that's a minute or so afterwards. Yeah, let's just get into the brief here, guys, and get off to the races here. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll check, make sure I have the window open for our bigger chat. Okay. And here is the PowerPoint. Okay, guys, let me make sure I can get this open on a couple windows here. Sorry, I got one window and then another window I have to work with here. Okay. All right. And that is open. Okay, so we're going to cover from the 23rd to the 4th, which was last Sunday. All right, guys, we'll go again clockwise on the fronts. We'll go with Kharkiv, which also covers Sumy Oblast, because there's occasional raids going on. Yeah, so, dude, things always happen the day after I do these things. Or we're supposed to do it. Yeah, so there's an incursion, fairly large incursion going on in Kharkiv Oblast. We'll get to the map after the front section here, guys, as usual. By the Ukrainians invading Russia. So far, the only known unit invading is the let me think here, the 22nd Mechanized Ukrainian Armed Forces. Yeah, we'll see. I haven't heard anything about the RDK, the Siberian Battalion, or the Legion of Russia, whatever they're called. Anyway, so we'll just keep an eye on that. I actually checked their channel, I didn't see anything, but anyway. So positional changes on the Kharkiv front, guys, mainly just around Hilboke and Volchansk. Russian forces only maintain control of the northern part of Hilboke. Russian forces still maintain position at the aggregate plant, which is this right here on the map. In central Volchansk, Russian forces also advanced to Polova Street in western Hilboke, and Ukrainian forces advanced along Soborna Street in central Volchansk and Stepova Street in north of Volchansk, so in these areas right here. I don't have any footage from Kharkiv Oblast, unfortunately, this last week. I have a lot more maps to cover with you guys here. Development note, I actually have a picture on this on an article I'll show you guys in a minute once we're done with this section. Russian Aerospace Forces VKS recently conducted an ODAB 1500 volumetric detonating aerial bomb against Ukrainian forces near Borshchova. So what that word salad means is that it was a thermobaric 1,500 kilogram bomb that they stuck a glide bomb kit onto. So it's a vacuum bomb that can, essentially glide. I'll show you the article here in a little bit once we get done with this front right here. Russian forces are concentrating their main efforts near Hilboke and Volchansk, and Russian forces are continuing to regroup to conduct assaults, but are not preparing a new offensive operation, so continual grind. Russian forces will likely no longer retain positions on the south bank of the Volcha River, which is this feature right here, because there's not been any reporting since July 10th, so they're just kind of pulling stakes up from there, it sounds like, for as far as reporting goes. This kind of, again, reflects the fluidity of the campaign spacing here, guys. Like these are last known reports and positions. The yellow is last Russian reported positions. You know, that's very fluid. But again, the space is very dynamic in Evolve Chance, so we really don't know as of right now. Russian mill blogger claimed Russian forces on control the western part of the aggregate plant in central Vovchansk, which is interesting. On the 31st, Ukraine forces ambushed elements of the Russian 322nd Spetsnaz training center as Russian units were conducting a sabotage and recon operation in Chernihiv Oblast. The insider source claimed that Ukrainian ambush killed 5 Russian soldiers, and the Russian military leadership concealed this failure following the insurgent ambush of Wagner personnel in Mali. So it's just interesting to note. Let me get to the article really fast that will show us the glide bomb. Let me just make sure I have it up here. And make sure everything's kosher. Alright, let me get open on OBS here. And stand by, guys. There we go. Okay, so this is, that's the bomb. Let me get to the other window so I can guide you through it. Yeah, this was taken in March, but you can see it's a fairly big sucker. It's a volumetric detonating aviation bomb, which they again installed a glide kit on with. The footage they show from March here was in Chasiv Yar. It's a fairly big sucker. Takes out, probably a quarter of a Russian city block. What else we got? Yeah, you also have ODAB 500 bombs. Some other examples of their 500 bombs, which are 3 times smaller. Stuff like that. So you can kind of get a picture of what they are. In April, a photo of the 1500 without the glide kit appeared. Given the timing of the photo's release and the fact the bomb was suspended underneath a Sukhoi 24 bomber, it's possible that the employment by the aviation units associated with Wagner during the fighting in Bakhmut. But this was an article from this year on March 30th. So that is that. Okay, let's get back to the brief here and move on to the next front. There we are. All right, over to Luhansk. Pretty quiet here, guys. It's been fairly interesting. There's been interesting developments along these circles. Not a whole lot of positive news. It's interesting. Sinkivka is holding pretty well, but the Russians have been pushing out in this area near Nevesky. Spirin and Belharivka holding pretty well, but again, Chasiv Yar, they're holding the canal pretty well. There is an interesting development with the crossing of the Russians over that area, and we'll show that video here in the next slide, but I'll just go over here real quick. Russian forces have made gains along the Nez Nosty Street in central Rozdolivka, and the Moscow military district. Units broke through the Ukraine defenses near Stelmakivka and are preparing to conduct mechanized assaults in that area. Again, no footage. Good development to note in this area in the last 2 weeks, guys, is that a Russian insider source claimed on July 28th that Ukrainian forces conducted an ATACMS missile strike against an unspecified Russian training ground, killing and wounding 90 personnel of the 228th Motorized Rifle Regiment from the Central Military District, who they were going to deploy to basically, this is the Avdiivka direction right here. So, all right, guys, going on over to Donetsk. I got 2 slides for Donetsk because this is where a lot of the Russian efforts are now concentrated. They've had some interesting expansions of the Russian central grouping of forces in this area. They've expanded their operational area of responsibility, and they're trying to pulse, as the term ISW is using, their offensives in certain directions. And we'll get into some more details in the headlines about this, though. There's a couple slides worth of notes I want to go over there. But we'll go over the material updates here first. Russian forces have advanced in southwestern New York. Along a couple streets. Russian forces also marginally advanced in Krasnohorivka. Russian forces also advanced in northern Zhelizny, and these are nodes, like these are villages. So that's why I cover them. I don't really cover windbreaks because there's a billion of them in Ukraine. But within those villages they are advancing. A Russian mobilized motorized rifle regiment of the First Donetsk People's Republic raised a Russian flag in central Yasno-Brodivka, which is in west of Avdiivka. Ukrainian forces actually recently regained lost positions in western Ivano-Darivka. Unfortunately, also the Russians recently seized Prohorez and Vovche, which are east of their main thrust right now. I forgot the name of the village or town, sorry. But there's also geolocated footage of Russian forces advancing up to and seizing a section of the OTAG 0532 highway southwest of Konstantinivka, which I think is behind Volodar. This is a fairly important development, and there's a separate section on that in headlines, actually. So we'll get that in a minute. Footage here is from the 79th Air Assault Brigade, Ukraine Brigade operating the Kurakhove direction, which is southwest and southwest of Donetsk. Published video footage of its personnel recently repelling a Russian reinforced platoon mechanized assault in the area. Let me get the chat minimized here, guys, so you can see it, because I know that's an issue sometimes. Okay, oh no, the chat is okay. Sorry guys, we're gonna have to keep the chat down just for the brief here. For anyone on YouTube, war does happen on this show, so just a forewarning. Okay, so developments of note in this area, guys. There's also another page of developments we'll get into after this slide right here. Commander of the Ukrainian brigade operating near Toretsk noted that Russian forces typically attack in squad-sized assault groups of about 10 soldiers, and they assault about 5 to 7 times per day. So a little bit under, a platoon to a little over a platoon. Ukrainian battalion commander operating the Seversk direction stated that Russian Ukraine forces have been using more drones and less artillery in the area, but Ukrainian forces currently have the advantage in drone improvements and adaptations. Russian forces operate large electronic warfare systems roughly 10 kilometers from the front lines and activate them when Russian forces conduct assaults to interfere with Ukrainian drones. So it's interesting to note because, how to put it, because we know they have a tiered soldier hierarchy, right? Their cheap, expendable Storm Z mobilized soldiers are the ones at the front lines, along with all the Nepalese and the Africans that they put in the trenches too, right? And with that, they turn off the electronic warfare 4, right? But when they have their elite units or line units assaulting behind the Storm Z units, they'll turn on the electronic warfare to protect those assets instead, right? That would be my deduction of what's expendable and not expendable in the idea of using electronic warfare. But anyway, Ukrainian military observer Yuri Butasov on the 23rd stated that Russian forces have advanced up to 6 kilometers in the past week, which is pretty fast for this war so far. In the Mirnorod Pokrovsk direction, which is northwest of Avdiivka, and noted that Russian forces are now 14 kilometers away from Mirnorod, which is what I was talking about earlier with Prohorez and Vovche. Sorry, maybe I roll my R's in the wrong at the wrong time, but you guys get the idea. So at this pace, they will be in Mirnorod in 2 weeks. Fortunately, it sounds like the Russians are, if I remember my map axes correct, they're actually moving resources away. And now with the incursion of the Ukrainians into Kursk Oblast, they probably will be stalling here, which is good because of a few reasons we'll get into. Budasov stated that Ukrainian forces are in a critically difficult situation. The Pokrovsk direction noted that Russian forces are attempting to attack the most degraded Ukrainian units in the area instead of targeting the weakest defensive positions. Budasov also stated that Russian forces are conducting small infantry-led frontal assaults in the Avdiivka direction. So what this means is that a lot of these units are degraded to very, very small numbers. They've been continually pounding these units since Avdiivka, and that was in April and May, I think. I forget which month. Anyway, and their companies are degraded down to like 40 people. For example, I was hearing some numbers earlier today. So the problem is that they can't rotate in new brigades because of roads basically being jammed, and that creates a target-rich environment for Lancet drones, glide bombs, stuff like that. So there isn't an opportunity for the Ukrainians to rotate these forces out and get them rest and refitted and remanned, basically. We do know that obviously that there are brigades being stood up, but sounds like there's delays in armaments still. A possibility with that, though, this is outside of the context of what we're just talking about here. How to put it? What with what we've seen in Kursk and them saying that there's a lack of resources, right? But they have enough resources to invade a new oblast in Russia. Maybe that's part of their strategic communications playbook right now, right? Because what we saw in the end of 2022 up to 2023's counteroffensive is that we got enough, we need more, which would be great, yada yada yada. But they didn't get enough, right? There was a swell of equipment that came in, but couldn't get the job done, right? And F-16s are only just coming out now, right? So maybe part of their the other thing is that they also telegraphed where they're going, what they have, and everything, right? The Russians were handed, the idea of where they were going on a silver platter, basically, right? So maybe part of their strategic communications is to deceptively say how bad things are with equipment. That way they generate political expediency to get the systems, the SAMTs, the Patriot missiles, everything else, the guns to the front. So possibly, I don't know. But them being able to assault Russia on an axis on two different roads, I don't know. That's an interesting flex. I don't I don't really put those two together, but maybe one is to deceive for the other. But that's just an idea of possibility. But anyway, Russian forces reportedly conducted another mechanized assault in the Kharkov direction on the 25th, following a reinforced battalion-sized Russian assault on the 24th. So they keep pounding in that area in Konstantinivka. That resulted in significant vehicle losses. This is noteworthy because of the volume of assets being committed. Russian forces conducted a reinforced company-sized assault with 3 tanks, 13 armored combat vehicles, 12 motorcycles, and roughly 200 personnel in the Kharkov direction, and that Ukraine's forces destroyed 1 tank and 2 combat vehicles. Got some more footage for you here, guys. So this is going to be a little bit in Chasiv Yar. On August 1st, Russian forces have advanced further west across the canal, where it runs underground just north of the Zvolnevye microrayon of Chasiv Yar. So this is that footage right here. So what we're seeing here was the Russians dropping off infantry to assault this trench line, taking a left at this T here, and it looks like a BMP firing at point blank range and stopping, and what looked like smoke coming out of the turret there eventually. But yeah, anyway, so that was the geolocated footage about that. Again, and this is a map of where they were supposedly advancing. So here's the canal here, guys. This is Chasiv Yar. This is a map showing an advancement and a counterattack that is still being held by the Ukrainians in the Canal microrayon, which is immediately east of Chasiv Yar. But there's also this northern flank, which supposedly the Russians have advanced right in this area, which would be along this clearing south of this forest right here. So just to give you an idea where they're at. To some note, the Russian forces recently seized Prores and Volcha. Russian forces may be attempting to achieve a limited tactical encirclement of Ukrainian forces northwest of Avdiivka, but are unlikely to make rapid gains. We'll show that later once we get to the map here, guys. Russian forces advanced along the T-0511 highway and nearby railway line to the south and may aim to create conditions to envelop Ukrainian forces. Russian military command may envision that Russian forces can relatively rapidly advance towards Hrodivka and southwestward along the rail lines towards Novohrodivka and Seldove to envelop Ukrainian positions. The Russians may hope that simultaneous advances towards the Karlivsky Reservoir and the Yasnoborivka and Karlivka would allow Russian forces to encircle those Ukrainian forces east of those of that line. The pace of Russian advances has previously slowed after Russian forces have approached water features and subsequent lines of advancement in the Avdiivka area. There's also a buildup of urban areas near Mirhorod and other smaller villages, towns really, that are close to about 10,000 people, approximately pre-war populations. So a little bit more built up, have some high-rise buildings. But that's what they're going to be facing here eventually. Hopefully there'll be a force combat. Sorry guys, got some caffeine in me, so now brain's going faster than my mouth. A combat force rotation for the brigades operating in that area so they can rotate in fresh troops and stop the Russians there. Based off other commentators I've seen talking about the war, they say that the lines we've talked about earlier in the Donetsk region are being built up behind current front lines, a good number of kilometers behind actually. They're sturdy fortifications along with the what we've come to expect from good Russian lines if we see them. Concrete pillboxes, wood latrines and stuff like that, right? But anyway, unfortunately, due to these current advances, the Ukrainians aren't able to dig in and create new trench lines out of earthworks, basically. So that's why it's also difficult for them to stop the Russian advance. Russian Mill blogger lamented that Russian forces are continuing to conduct thoughtless mechanized assaults southwest of Donetsk, likely referring to the July 24 battalion-sized mechanized assault against Konstantinivka, and claimed that Russian forces launched these assaults without electronic warfare coverage to protect against Ukrainian FPV drones. Additional geolocated footage shows that Russian vehicles marginally advanced across the Seversky Donbass Canal in the area where it runs underground north of Chasiv Yar, which is where we showed. But Ukraine forces immediately struck the vehicle before it could advance further on the west bank of the canal. So don't know if it's a what would they call that? A permanent position. Anyway, an ongoing position where the Russians could hold. But we'll see in the future here. Russian forces speculate that Ukrainian forces may have used an FPV drone to down a Russian helicopter taking off in Donetsk. No footage of this, guys. I couldn't find it. Millblog insinuated on July 31st that Ukrainian FPV drone downed an Mi-8 helicopter in Donetsk City, and footage purportedly shows the wreckage of the helicopter in the area. I couldn't find that, unfortunately. Russian blogger claimed Ukrainian forces successfully counterattacked in New York and captured an unspecified number of Russian personnel. No numbers. And Russian forces have achieved a long-standing tactical objective of reaching the O-TAG-0532 highway and cutting the Ukrainian ground line of communication connecting Volodar and Konstantinivka. But Russian positions along the highway likely do not portend tactically significant or more rapid Russian gains in the area. The reason why, again, that's so important for guys that have seen the show for such a long time, we know how hard the Russians have been trying to advance on Volodar, and they finally got behind Volodar from different axes. But that doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are leaving Volodar quite yet. But the reason also why that area is specifically important is because there's a rail line that runs south of Donetsk in that area, which would supposedly, create better logistics for the Russians despite being so close to front lines. So, but anyway, that's the idea. So yeah, over to Kherson Zaporizhzhia, you guys. Again, pretty quiet for the most part, but after Sodal was sacked, the Russians have been advancing on the Delta Islands, on the Dnieper River there. Russian forces continue assaults on the east bank of the Kherson Oblast, including near Krinky and the islands of the Dnieper River Delta. Ukrainian forces marginally advanced northeast of Robatny, and the Russian forces have marginally advanced south of Tokmachka. And Russian forces recently advanced north of Robatny and have seized all of Robatny. The only reason why that's really significant is because that was the furthest extent within this pocket right here, guys. Robatny's about right in there, with the Ukrainians counterattacking that area. Not much there, guys. I've seen one or two journalists, to their credit, mainly British, I think, actually go there with the territorial defense unit that was actually in that area. There's nothing but basements and concrete buildings that are blown out to hell, and it's just a plain with some holes in the ground. It's not nothing of value there. No footage, just the map. Yeah, so Ukraine General Staff report on the 23rd that Ukrainian forces damaged the Slavyanin ferry at the port of Kavkaz in Krasnodar Krai during a drone strike on the night of the 22nd to 23rd. And Russian forces have been using the ferry to transport rail cars, vehicles, and containers for military purposes, and this was the last functioning ferry of 3 ferries the Russian forces used in the Kerch Strait bridge, to cross the Kerch Strait, sorry. Russian forces routinely use ferries to relieve pressures on Russian ground lines of communication connecting Crimea to Russia proper. So the reason why this is important, guys, is because if you guys recall the first strike on the Kerch Strait Bridge, simultaneously there was a fuel train that was crossing the train portion of the bridge, right? Because you got the coming and going road section, then you got the train section, right? So at the Ukrainians timed this perfectly. They hit it the first time. It was the first time with the truck when a fuel train was going by, right? So if they can eliminate all the other means of transportation for the Russians to get military goods and fuel across the bridge, that means that they're going to have to start using fuel trains and ammo trucks, maybe stuff like that, to get across the bridge, which makes it much more combustible, way more explosive. You see where we're going. So hopefully, by eliminating this ferry, that the Russians will try to leverage and use the rail portion here, and we'll see. One of the Storm Shadows, or a few of the Storm Shadow missiles that the Ukrainians have been holding on to finally take out the Kerch Strait Bridge, or at least damage it again. So anyway, accumulated number of Russian forces in this area in Zaporizhzhia Oblast are about 90,000. Russian forces are forming a defensive group in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Not a big one. Ukrainian aerial naval drones are reportedly affecting Russian naval and naval aviation operations. There are no aircraft at 2 of the 5 airfields in Crimea. The 28th, that there are no aircraft at 2 of 5 airfields that Russian naval aviation used for operations, presumably over the Black Sea, due to the threat of Ukrainian aerial drones. I think that was referring to Crimea. It was also stated the Russian Navy moved many Black Sea ships to Novorossiysk to cross the Nar Krai to protect their ships from Ukrainian naval drones. Okay, guys, that does it for the fronts. Let me get to the map here, so we'll go over that real quick. Let me go down here and stand by, guys. Talk amongst yourselves if you can. Sorry, I gotta find it again. That is something else. There we are. Okay, 1 second. Make sure I get that up on the window. Alright, there we are. Sorry, guys. I know usually you want to talk and not have dead air, but I'm trying to work through this here also. Okay, that's that. Why is it showing that still? Okay, here we go. There's the map. Okay, there we are. Okay, now we are kicking. Okay, so this is in the Luhansk. Oh, sorry, Luhansk. The sorry, guys. The Kharkiv Oblast. Luhansk is over here, obviously. So let's see if they've actually updated the map for the encroachment into Kursk Oblast here. I don't think so. Unfortunately, this map is not as good as it used to be. But we do see some upgraded Russian presence here. We don't see anything really talking about the incursion of the Ukrainians into that area. We do have one picture from our chat I'll show after we get down to the update of the fronts here, guys. So yeah, we'll start in Hilboke here. So supposedly the Ukrainians control the western portion of Hilboke, and the Russians control the northern part of which would be this little bit right here. Nothing really going on to the east of that section there. We talked about Volchansk. They've pretty much kept that area pretty much the same as you can see here. It hasn't really been updated in quite some time. Nothing really going on around near Staritsia. I've heard some things, but nothing really moving the needle on the map there. Okay, so we'll go down to Luhansk here, guys. So as you can see here, this is an interesting development. We'll go back a little bit, see if we can show some of the progress in this area by the Russians. Not much over the last week, but you can see that it's been ongoing for quite some time. Anyway, so Sinkivka is being held by the Ukrainians fairly well. A couple windbreaks here, which were taken by the Russians. Not a real big deal in this area. But again, this current push right here is something we did monitor about, I think, last month, even before that. The Russians pushed from this windbreak and captured this part of the village and then pushed north. The Ukrainians basically pulled back to this area outside of the village, these windbreaks. I don't really see a road, to be honest. Maybe, because there's a road. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. You see this windbreak right here, but don't know where it really goes. You see a road right here, kind of, but this looks like a creek of some sort because you can see a water feature right about here, and then it goes to Kolesnivka, which again was near the Osko River. That's a major objective for the Russians, obviously, but they got quite a distance there to go through. Maybe we'll see the third assault pinch off this area. Be pretty cool if they did. But again, a few other thrusts here along some windbreaks around the Andriivka area. Nothing really worrisome. Makivka is still contested. A fairly large village for this area, but nothing too critical, I would say. We've, again, talked about the success of Third Assault and some other units in this area because this is the major area that we want to protect because of Lehman being a major logistics and ground line communication area. What else? Yeah, Belgorod is still good. This thrust south of Seversk is stalled for the Russians. Yeah, so we talked about Chesiv Yar. So you can see over the last couple of weeks, it's become a solid wall pressing up against the canal there, guys. What we can see here, and this was in the Kalnivka area. The footage we showed was in this area right here. That's about as best as I could show you, though, because of the the resolution. But yeah, that's the area where we saw them cross, and it does seem that the Russians are concentrating in the Kalinivka area to really try to push further. I'm guessing because this area is so hard to hold. I mean, you got nothing but grass here, probably lowlands and water. It's probably harder for the Russians to cross this area because of the open area in between Novi and this area right here. There's a little bit of cover here, probably higher ground, I would imagine, and some more urban area for them to also hide in. That's where they're currently trying to focus on. Supposedly, well, the Russians were claiming they took Klishchivka and the highlands around it here, which would be to the west. According to this map, it's contested, so we'll go with that. So yeah, Toretsk. So we talked about Zalizny, Pivnichi. It's been a slow grind for the Russians here. They still got a lot to go through. The reason why we want to hold on to Toretsk because if they push, they take all this area right here, which isn't especially strategic though. But again, this area's been held since 2014. This darker ruby area is the original lines of contact prior to the 22 invasion. This is one envelopment the Russians are trying to work on. Probably won't happen. So yeah, Prohriz and Vovche right here, and the Russians moved up to Vesely actually. So take a look back here and see how fast. Yeah, so they've been advancing fairly quickly over the last week here. Um, so yeah, so this was on the 28th. We'll go back to the 26th here. So over the last couple of weeks, it's been pretty quick for the Russians, and they're from their usual tempo. Yeah, and Hodorivka is the other area, and Pokrovsk is the major area where they want to get to, because that's the again major node, and Mirnorod is the one village in front of it. So what we talk about the urban areas, we're talking about Novo Hodorivka, Soldove right here, and these areas east of Pokrovsk. Um, yeah, so it looks like the Russians are trying to create a pocket here. Would probably be smart for the Ukrainians to get behind this water feature. Unfortunately, what we were talking about a few months ago was that the Russians would try to be held along these water features here. Unfortunately, due to the failure of that rotation months ago around Okheratine, the Russians have been going along this axis right here. So, yep, so you have this long semi-horseshoe there. Krasnohorivka still being fought over. Supposedly the Ukrainians are still holding the north of the town there. Marinka and Herorivka still being fought over. Let's get down to Volodar. So supposedly the Russians got to this road right here. Um, Unfortunately, for them, there's also another road here, but they'd have to go cross country to get to Volodar. And also there might be some backcountry roads to get out to there also, I'd imagine. But yeah, supposedly that was the Russians' like big breakthrough was to get to this point right here. Konstantinivka is being fought over. Got a long stretch of villages there for them to fight over too. But again, this footage, 2 years running has been the Russians trying to push through this area, but they finally supposedly got behind them. But that's what's been talked about. Yarajne still being held by the Russians. Looks like they pushed to the far north end of that there. We'll get over to Robotny just to see if the map reflects the update. Doesn't show, but it looks like they control the majority of the village there, according to that map. That's really it, guys. So that does it for your map update. Okay, so we'll get back to the brief. And we'll talk about some missile stuff first before we get into everything else. Yeah, so this is a new drone but the Russians are making called the Gebera. Or probably not rolling my R's correctly, but but yeah, so this thing is essentially made out of plywood and styrofoam. You might laugh at it. I chuckled my first time I looked at it, but it's basically a decoy, from what I could tell. See, this is all styrofoam in here, and this is the electronic circuitry in it, with a wood prop on it. So you put up one of these things and might take a high explosive round and take it down, but that's probably cheaper than the round itself made in Germany, right? So anyway, Russian Ukrainian sources reported that the new cheaply made foam and plywood Russian drones are Gebera drones produced at the Elubuga Special Economic Zone plant in the Republic of Tatarstan. Russian opposition reported on July 28th that the Russian channels began posting advertisements for the Gebera drone shortly after Ukraine's GUR spokesman told Reuters about the drones in a July 26 article. These Gebera drones closely resemble the Iranian Shahed drones, at least hull-wise, and are likely meant to act as false targets to distract Ukrainian air defenses while simultaneously transmitting details in Ukrainian air defenses back to Russian forces. I would be interested to know how they're able to do that with Again, that was the only real picture of the electronic stuff I could find on the post I found this on. Um, maybe their AWACS that is left, or I guess it would be their A50s, their Antonovs. If they're tracking this, and they know where they went down, where they're being shot from, maybe. But I don't know. It would be interesting to know, because that would be an advancement in Russian electronics for sure. But anyway, okay. So I broke this headline stuff into a couple of sections here, guys. We got Russian law, Russian feds. What else we got? Some battlefield insights, which is what I really want to get into with you also, guys, and then a sort of bottom of the stack stuff later on. And we're also going to talk about some updates about Wagner's route in Mali, which will be at the end of the headlines. So yeah, here we go. Okay, I want to preface this first with the end of the most recent Russian military advertisement. But yeah, here we go. So anyway, the reason why I had to show that to you guys is because I want you to understand how Russians define Russians. As much as the West talks about diversity being our strength, Russians are really leaning into that, especially in their military. But yeah, so that those are all Russians. Anyway, Russia is taking steps to codify terms broadly expanding the official Russian definition of prosecutable extremism as part of its ongoing efforts to criminally prosecute and stymie domestic opposition to the Kremlin and its war in Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs published on the 22nd the draft of a new Russian counterterrorism strategy, which establishes legal definitions for Russophobia. They're trying to put this into law, and xenophobia, and modifies the definitions of radicalism, countering extremism, and subjects of countering extremism. These newly modified legal definitions significantly expand the Kremlin's ability to criminally prosecute anyone who opposes the Kremlin by classifying domestic opposition under a number of nebulous and broad definitions, obviously, that are linked to existing Russian information operations that both aim to discredit international actors, NGOs, and promote self-censorship domestically. The new strategy defines Russophobia as, quote, manifestation of hatred, hostility, and hostile attitudes to citizens of Russia, Russian language, and culture, unquote, through aggressive attitudes and actions. For Britain's government's looking at that, it's like, oh, that's a good idea. Anyway, from, quote, individual representatives and political forces, as well as discriminatory actions on the part of authorities of states unfriendly to Russia, unquote. The new strategy defines xenophobia as, quote, a manifestation of hatred, hostility, and or intolerance towards certain social groups and that was taken from their website, communities of people, unquote, and defines radicalism and as, quote, adherence to an ideology of violence characterized by desire for a decisive and radical change to the constitutional system of the Russian Federation. Anyway, so a lot of legal mumbo jumbo there, guys, but you kind of get the idea. Overlaps a lot of different areas between Russophobia, xenophobia, radicalism. So, your state-sanctioned Russian nationalists are even more under the thumb of this. Anyway, that in of itself really just kind of succinctly puts what's going on. Anyway, so that's your first bit of criminal law there. Wheeling south toward Georgia. Got a couple updates from Georgia, and this is coming off or dovetailing off the foreign agents law that was protested, but those protests really dwindled down. Georgian authorities reportedly placed roughly 300 Georgian citizens who have served as volunteers in the Georgian Legion alongside Ukrainian forces on Georgia's wanted list. Georgian Legion commander Mamuka Mamulashvili, Georgian's a little funny, told Russian language investigative outlet The Insider on the 21st that Georgian authorities placed roughly 300 volunteers associated with the Georgian Legion on Georgia's wanted list. Mamulashvili did not state what alleged crimes the Georgian government charged the volunteers with, but he did note that he did not know the two Georgian volunteers that the Georgian State Security Service, SUS or SSSG, reportedly recently summoned for questioning of, quote, conspiracy to overthrow the government and terrorism. The Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs charged over 70 volunteers of the Georgian Legion, including the leader in absentia, with, quote, recruiting and participating in military operations of mercenaries on the side of the Ukrainian forces on July 2023. I put Mamulashvili, sorry, I was like a 2-year-old reading a book there, on Russia's wanted list in October 2023. So you're starting to see, as soon as they pass the law, now these are foreign agents fighting for their country, outside of their country, for another country that Russia's invading. Anyway, Mamulashvili claimed the Russian government placed the Georgian Legion volunteers on its wanted list so that the Georgian government would have grounds to arrest them, and reported that Georgian special services have advised many Georgian Legion volunteers returning to Georgia from Ukraine to leave Georgia, which is interesting. The SUS blamed Georgian volunteers serving alongside Ukrainian forces, among other perceived opposition actors, for plotting a violent coup in October 2023 and inciting protests in May 2024 when that foreign agents bill was being ratified. But yeah, so that's where Georgia's going. It's aligning itself more into Russia's orbit. Again, because of a Russian-aligned oligarch. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I forgot his name. The guy that founded and is head of Georgian Dream, literally has a stockholder in Gazprom. So, I think his worth is a quarter of the annual GDP of Georgia. Actually, I forgot the actual billions amount of dollars he has, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. Imagine a guy that has a quarter of your economy's worth of money. Anyway, the Georgian State Security Service reiterated standard Kremlin information operations targeting former Georgian opposition figures and former Ukrainian law enforcement officials. They announced on the 24th that it's investigating former senior Georgian government officials and former employees of Ukrainian law enforcement agencies for organizing and financing attempts to overthrow the government by violent means and protests, etc., etc. But anyway, so that's where that Georgian foreign agents bill is going. It's now targeting Georgians fighting against Russia in Ukraine, of course. So yeah, next section here, guys, is Russian feds. The Russian State Duma adopted an amendment on the 24th that will allow Russian commanders to punish subordinates for using personal communication devices and navigation devices at the front line, drawing continued backlash from the Russian infospace and ultranationalists from Russia. Several Duma deputies opposed the bill, but a lot of the bill bloggers are criticizing it because they express concerns that Russian military officials intend to use punishments for personal device usage to settle personal conflicts and censor legitimate complaints against the Russian MOD. It should also be noted that a lot of these personal devices use and disseminate complaints. Russian ultranationalists continue to lament the potential impacts of the amendment on the front line, where Russian forces rely on insecure devices to organize command and control, or C2, logistics and combat operations, because the Russian forces aren't able to give out enough hardware and have their own networks to coordinate a lot of this stuff. They have to use Google Maps, probably, essentially, right, to get these things done. So with those possibly being enforced, who knows, because the Russian military is not exactly standard across the entire front. We'll see how it works. It might actually help the Ukrainians. We might start seeing more uncoordinated Russian assaults if this is going to be enforced. We'll see. Russian-backed former Ukraine special separatist politician Oleg Zaryov, who is pictured right here, pointedly stated that the amendment will be a serious blow to the Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov's image, and claimed the amendment is clearly the Russian MOD's made by their own initiative. The Russian government continues to support educational programs on information hybrid warfare. I thought this was interesting. Aimed at training Russians to conduct and counter information operations. This is why I put in the Russian feds thing, because the Russians you're debating online might actually be Russian genuine feds. They use open source research methodology and to effectively analyze and counter hybrid threats for the Kremlin. A Russian ultranationalist mill blogger and journalist advertised on 30th applications to a 6-month professional training program at the Altair Academy of Political Science in Moscow that will teach Russian professionals defend against and conduct information hybrid operations. You know, people debating on Telegram or Facebook or even the comment section of YouTube. The Russian mill blogger who advertised this course on information hybrid warfare is one of the several Russian military-focused journalists listed as teachers of the program. The Altair Academy of Political Science stated that it created this course and several others on, quote, proxy intelligence and intelligence support for information operations, unquote, and, quote, proxy intelligence for non-government organizations, NGOs, in accordance with the February 20th, 2024 decree from the president, for his decree. These programs feature experts who are current and former employees of the Russian FSB and Rosguardia. So in Russian so their own internal security service and their National Guard, I guess you can call them that, are the ones that are going to be teaching this program. So interesting to note. It'd be like the FBI or the ATF teaching how to debate foreigners on social media, essentially. Anyway, the Russian Federal Council also passed a series of bills strengthening the Russian government's control over the info space. Essentially, that bit right there is channels on Telegram or social media with over 10,000 subscribers will have to provide personal identifying information to the Russian federal censor, their federal censor. Also limiting the number of SIM cards that foreigners can purchase and a few other things. So anyone that has over 10,000 subscribers, and people debating for the Kremlin are probably legitimate feds. So, anyway, just want to share that with you guys. Okay, so the more material things going, I guess material and the more vague, nebulous stuff going on in the background, guys. We'll get into Battlefield Insights here. So, I want to have General Sittersky speak here first a little bit. He had an interview recently. Oh, is that you, Alex?
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, hey, how you doing?
Hey, doing great.
Cool. Yeah. Well, it's actually a good point to stop here before I get into another section here. Do you have anything you want to comment on before we continue on?
There's a lot of things to comment on, but I don't want to derail your show, so no, not really at the moment.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right, guys. So we talked about the refocus of let's see here, the Donetsk front for the Russians. They recently expanded the central grouping of forces for the Russian forces in the Donetsk Oblast. But yeah, General Sittersky has some insights about numbers and some other things going on for the Russians. I'll add some commentary at the end of this slide right here. Sittersky stated that the Russian military has significantly increased its manpower and material commitments to the war in Ukraine over the last 2.5 years. But Sittersky's statements are not indicative of a sudden increase in the Russian military presence in Ukraine. He told the Guardian in an interview on the 24th that Russian forces currently have 520,000 personnel committed to the war, and the Russian military aims to have 690,000 personnel committed by the end of 2024. He noted the fighting is ongoing along 977 kilometers of the 3,700 kilometer front line, and reiterated that the Russian military continues to pursue tactical gains regardless of significant manpower losses. So I imagine that's actually expanded to over 1,000 now with the incursion into Kursk. But I forgot to show that to you guys. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Sittersky stated that Russian forces currently have a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 equipment advantage over Ukrainian forces. The Russian forces have doubled the number of Russian tanks and armored personnel carriers and tripled the amount of artillery systems in Ukraine since 2024. His comparison to the current Russian military contingent committed to Ukraine with the initial invasion force underscores the difference between the military force that Russia has gradually staffed and supplied over 2.5 years of war, and the Kremlin wrongly assessed that they could quickly depose the Ukrainian government. The British International Institute for Strategic Studies stated on February 2024 that Russia will likely be able to sustain losing about 3,000 armored fighting vehicles annually for at least 2 to 3 more years until about 2026 or 2027 by refurbishing Soviet-era vehicles. It's also stated by Ukraine that there may be, stated that as of May 3, there were roughly between 510,000 and 515,000 Russian military personnel in Ukraine. So between August and May, they went up about 100,000 there. So you can see them ramping up despite their losses. It is unclear how long Russia will be able to sustain its current force generation rates. That's something I'm really curious about. I can't find any estimates because I'll give you an example, right? So there was an article recently about Russia's training pipeline for Nepalese. That was the data I got. So anyway, so this was Combat Veteran Reacts. I think he was talking about in an article where they were getting 300. Again, I'm going off rough numbers what he was giving. 300 Nepalese every 2 weeks, plus and minus a few days for logistics and training and anything else. It equaled about 6,000 Nepalese a year, right? And then you also got recruits from Sri Lanka, India, Africa, the Istan countries in Central Asia, places like that, right? So that adds to a significant contribution of foreign fighters in Russia. But how long those force generations are ongoing is entirely up to politics. I have not read much about the U.S. pressing other countries to not have their people go and go work for Russia under false pretenses and stuff like that. I think that's a major oversight from the United States and Western countries because that's obviously where a lot of Russian manpower is coming from. But again, the lack of political willpower in the West is obviously on display in Britain and France right now. So, but yeah, anyway, so if they could press on that, they could definitely choke Russia just a little bit more. But anyway, the other thing, before we press on here, guys, I know I'm monologuing here a little bit, but the 2026 year number again keeps popping up. Like we talked about the Russian federal budget, elections, and kind of how Ukraine is. This is the year of defense. Next year is going to be the year of the maybe offense, and then how these peace talks are going, it might run into 2026, right? So it's just that number keeps popping up. And Russia right now, it's suspected why they're pressing so hard is because it's an election year and we're only 3 months away from November. So despite them being north of 1,000 people a day now and casualties, they're more worried about who is going to become the president of the United States. So they need to, for politics, to keep pressing the front, to keep making gains at huge losses, and to affect the supply of arms going to Ukraine, right? And this makes sense actually because we saw the Battle of Bakhmut. It was Zelensky's decision to basically show the West that Bakhmut's a fortress, and to their credit, they've held on to that city for like 8 months. Despite tremendous losses on Wagner and the Russian political crisis that followed. Yeah, stuff. It politics trumps strategy, unfortunately. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, for people my military background, but that's the reality of most things. Anyway, lastly, Syrskyi statements highlight that Ukrainian forces have successfully defended liberated territory in the face of Russia's military significant manpower advantage and stuff. Okay, so anyway, more battlefield insights here, guys. Ukrainian forces blunted one of Russia's largest mechanized assaults since October 2023 in western Donetsk Oblast on 24th. Geolocated footage on the 24th shows Ukrainian forces stopped a reinforced battalion-sized Russian mechanized assault near Konstantinivka after Russian forces advanced up to the southern outskirts of the settlement. They attacked simultaneously with 11 tanks, 45 combat vehicles, and a rare Terminator tank. along with 12 motorcycles and 200 personnel from several directions. The brigade defended and repelled this attack, reported that Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance identified the mechanized columns from a distance, and that Ukrainian forces used artillery, drones, and minefields to blunt Russian assaults. They reported that they damaged or destroyed 6 Russian tanks, 7 armored combat vehicles, and all 12 motorcycles that Russian forces retreated after they destroyed the first wave of vehicles. However, Russian sources have long identified that highway between Volodar and Konstantinivka as their tactical objective, and that was their target. On the map, it shows that as contested, but Russians are saying they hold it. Take that with a grain of salt, but that was their target for that assault. So it goes to show how much they still focus on that particular sector of the front. The Russian military commander's willingness to expend large numbers of armored vehicles on limited tactical gains reflects poor long-term strategical foresight, operational foresight, and constraints on Russian equipment in the medium to long term. Again, some more numbers here, guys. It was reported from Front Intelligence, and there was a video actually posted in our chat. This was, God, I forgot the name of the YouTube channel. Anyway, that was Covert Cabal. Yeah, anyway, they did another update on their open air storage count of vehicles. All the T90s are gone. Most, like 80% of the T80s are gone. About half the T72s are gone. I'm trying to go memories at the top of my head. There's still a lot of BMPs. Most of the MTLBs are still there. I thought there was one source I read that said they were gone. It might have been a different variant of MTLB, but it doesn't matter. A lot of BMPs, a lot of BTRs still from the 50, 60, 80 variant. Yeah, anyway, it's just interesting to note, but they still have about half the equipment there in volume, right? But particular pieces of equipment are drastically depleted. Again, it was noted that they mainly restored old T-62 and T-55 tanks. Yeah, Front Intelligence noted that these restored vehicles have yet to appear on the battlefield and says that Russia may be preparing them for later in 2024. It was reported that internal Russian documents show that Russian tanks damaged within the past 6 months are widely waiting for replacement parts. The widespread engine shortages have leading to the increasing cannibalization of the more modern T-80 tanks to conduct repairs. This is because the T-80 tank is actually a turbine engine, not a diesel engine. So they reverted back to a diesel engine for the T-90 because it's essentially a T-72 hull. And even for the T-14 Armada, it was actually a diesel engine, but they couldn't get the engine to fit in the hull, basically. But again, this turbine engine is very advanced. Even by even by American standards, it's pretty advanced. But it's hard for them to cannibalize and get foreign parts for, because that's what you need for turbine engines, really. Russia has currently enough armored vehicles to conduct periodic company to larger mechanized assaults in the foreseeable future, however. A little bit more here, guys. The Russian military has recently expanded the Russian Central Grouping forces, like I keep talking about, suggesting that the Russian military command has deprioritized the grouping's previous task to act solely on an operational maneuver force in the Avdiivka direction. That command may instead be tasking the Central Grouping of forces with overseeing the bulk of Russia's main offensive efforts in Donetsk Oblast. I think it's safe to say that Donetsk Oblast is Putin's primary objective this year. We talked about beginning of the year, the Russians wanted to control all of Donetsk and all of the Luhansk Oblast, at least along the administrative borders, within this year. Obviously, they're not going to be able to pull it off, but they're still going to give it the good old college Russian try there. Russian forces transferred the central grouping of forces from Kremena area to the Avdiivka direction ahead of the Russian offensive action to seize Avdiivka from October 2023 to February 2024. Proceeded to concentrate almost all of the central military district elements deployed to Ukraine during that offensive operation. The responsibility for the Toretsk effort has roughly doubled the length of that AOR, and has already drawn notable manpower from the Avdiivka effort, which is interesting because we showed the progress in that map section over the last week and a half. Basically, they're still on pace, pretty good. They're about 14 kilometers from Myarivka. Again, I don't know. Maybe they'll still start pulling more forces from this area to Kursk. Don't know. We'll see. But yeah, some more insights here, guys. Russian forces conducted 5 platoon to battalion-sized mechanized assaults in western Donetsk on the July 23rd and 30th. These mechanized pushes are likely a manifestation of their forecasted summer offensive, but they likely lack the wider operation capacity to mount a separate renewed offensive in Donetsk Oblast or elsewhere in the front this summer. Ukraine brigade that repelled the July 24th reinforced battalion mechanized assault near Konstantinivka again reported they committed all that 10 tanks, 47 vehicles and stuff. These attacks show a periodic and pulsating Russian mechanized assaults, likely to represent the extent of Russian offensive capacity. These aren't really, how to put it, supporting lines of advance. They're just pulsing to see where there's weakness in the Ukrainian lines, and in particularly in the Avdiivka area, like we talked about, keep hammering those depleted Ukrainian forces, because it's weak. It's easier to attack a depleted force than a weaker defensive line is the logic, and it seems to be working, at least along that line. Russian forces have conducted periodic platoon and company-sized mechanized assaults in the Lyman, Chasiv Yar, and Avdiivka directions in Donetsk Oblast throughout the summer. They have more recently intensified assault west and southwest of Donetsk, especially along Volodar. Russian military command's willingness to accept costly armored vehicles without conducting a large-scale multi-directional offensive operation or making operationally significant advances in western Donetsk will likely burn the Russian military command in the long run. But yeah, so that's something I just want to kind of give you guys, the developments ongoing right now and what they're trying to do. This was an anomaly. I just want to kind of share it with you guys. We already know that North Korea sent between 3 to 4 million artillery shells, was a number I was given this morning on a podcast I was listening to. But they might be getting equipment. So I'll give you the details here, and then I'll explain the capabilities of this particular vehicle in a minute. North Korea may be expanding the volume and variety of weapons it's providing to Russia. A Ukrainian battalion operating the Ukraine Belgorod Oblast, so this vehicle was spotted in Russia proper itself. Report on July 30th that Russian forces northwest of Shebenko, Belgorod, are fielding a North Korean-based Bullseye-4 anti-tank guided missile system mounted on North Korean M2010 wheeled armored personnel vehicle, basically a BTR. The Russian ones, from my understanding, have 4 wheels. This one in particular is a North Korean variant with 3 wheels. And supposedly, several Russian mill bloggers cautiously amplified Ukraine report but question its veracity. As you can see in this picture, I'm sorry it's so small, guys. If you've got bigger screens or TVs, just lean forward a little bit. I'll try to explain it to you guys a little bit here. So you can see 3 wheels right here, and whereas you see with this bigger picture, this V essentially right here with the step ladder, kind of see it right here, right in between the front wheel and the middle, the front axis and the middle wheel axis right there. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. And then you see this top-mounted turret, essentially, right? It looks like there's a hatch right here, which kind of correspondingly matches this right here. That's the idea, anyway, and supposedly this is an over-the-horizon missile launcher. It's kind of their version of not a tow missile, but a javelin missile. Best metaphor or equivalent I could draw from. It was a video I saw a week and a half ago of a strike that the Ukrainians were trying to explain. They had some questions about it. Seeing this vehicle later by itself in an open field, it explains the capabilities of how I think it was a T-64 that was blown up by a missile. The Russians were showing footage of it. Ukrainians didn't know what it was. And then they see this later, and it kind of matches the capability of what they saw in that footage to this vehicle. Don't know. It's just one really grainy picture, kind of potato footage, 1/6-wheeled vehicle in the middle of a dirt field, and what looks like a North Korean vehicle, maybe. So anyway, that was a mystery last week. But yeah, so last thing here, guys, before we press on to, I think, the one more map thing. Russian forces continue to make slow, steady advance in the Pokrovsk direction, largely enabled by Ukrainian manpower shortages, like we talked about, and the terrain in the area immediately northwest of Avdiivka. Russian advances will likely slow as further Russian forces advanced into a line of layer and more urban settlements. Zelensky identified the Pokrovsk direction as the Russian military's current priority on August 1st. I know that Russian forces are currently able to advance in certain areas of the front line because Ukraine is still struggling with manpower shortages. And they're currently propping and equipping new brigades. This is, how to put it, this is an ongoing problem. I think this is a residual from the Soviet system of mobilization and equipping new units and not staffing veteran units with equipment and manpower. We saw this with, I always go back to the counteroffensive because it just blew my mind. They stood up and equipped new Greenhorn brigades with Western equipment and training, right? But the training was totally incompatible with what they were tasked with doing, right? Taking a fortified line and going across without air support. Now, units like the 67th, the 59th, the 3rd Assault, the 12th Azov, take your pick, right? The 47th got experience. The Marines, the 35th, 36th Marine Brigades. These are combat experience units with well-known commanders, right? Hell, the 59th Brigade commander got promoted up to Siersky as like inner cabal. They weren't given the newest Western equipment and all that stuff that was given last year, right? But they stood up these new brigades and they didn't know how to deal under stress of combat. They got far as they could, it was probably more than most American or Western forces could have, to be honest. But they still didn't break the line. Now, units that are combat experienced with leaders that know how to maintain offensive momentum at the battalion and brigade level, much less a brigade corps level, might have been a better choice. And them doing the same thing this year. Now, we're talking about those 13 brigades that are known about. They're giving Western weapons to these new brigades that are being stood up, but they're not backfilling these units in the Donetsk region after the Avdiivka fell. I don't know why. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, they're losing, again, not losing a terrible amount of ground. It still sucks that they're losing ground. But, you patch the hole where you see it. You don't stand up a new pipe and then say you're going to put it in. You guys get what I'm saying. I'm trying to use a bad plumbing metaphor there, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's what's happening. So Zelensky observed that some Ukrainian brigades are unable to conduct rotations because the replacement brigades are not yet staffed or equipped, which creates exploitable weaknesses. Mashavet stated the Ukrainian defenders in the Pokrovsk direction have inferior equipment and defensive means and are therefore currently unable to slow the Russian advances. The current rate of tactical advance towards Pokrovsk will likely not continue indefinitely. Might slow down because of Kursk. And Russian forces are approaching a line of larger, more urban settlements. And the next defensible line between the current forward Russian line of advance and Pokrovsk runs through the towns of Seldove, Novohorivka, and Hodorivka, with many of the current Russian tactical advances focused specifically on the Novohorivka sector line. They're about 5 kilometers west. That line is about 5 kilometers west of Russian positions in the Vesely area. And these towns have about 14,000 and 2,000 pre-war populations, respectively. Last thing here, guys, before we go to the bottom of the stack, Russian forces may have established a more flexible command and control structure with a restructuring this operation. This center was it the Russian center grouping of forces? Center grouping of forces, the Russian military. They rapidly redeployed forces across several operational directions and on several occasions to address vulnerabilities and strengthen grouping of forces conducting offensive and defensive operations, but rarely have groupings of forces able to redeploy the same elements multiple times in quick succession within different sectors within their AORs. Russian groupings of forces in Ukraine have increasingly tasked smaller sectors in their areas of responsibility to some units and formations in order to create more cohesive command and control, and have typically only redeployed elements after regrouping those units in rear for reconstitution replenishment. So the smaller the front, the more aggressive they can act on opportunities. Typically, that is a Western trait where NCOs are given the privilege of acting on their own volition. Perhaps this is a evolution of Russian adaptation with a specific grouping of forces with their officers to take advantage of opportunities that they see. So I do not know who the commander is of this current Russian central grouping of forces is, but this does reflect an evolution adaptation which benefits Russia, obviously. The reported redeployment of commemorative elements of the same units in rapid succession suggests that the grouping of forces have established a more flexible C2 structure and is attempting to prove how quickly Russian forces can commit forces to these areas where tactical opportunities emerge, like we saw with that failed unit rotation of the Ukrainians. Anyway, so it just goes to show that they're able to rotate their guys a little bit more quickly, relocate their forces on the fly, and take advantage, which has developed into this salient right here for the Russians. Again, that's been since February, but it has turned into ground gains for them. So that's one trend that has been noted. All right, yeah. So Wagner's route, guys. Some stuff I want to give you here. It kind of clears the fog about this whole incident. Rebel Coalition. It sounds like there's like 3 different groups, but I think ISW only mentions 2. Anyway, the Rebel Coalition reportedly killed and wounded dozens of Russian servicemen and Wagner mercenaries, as well as a prominent Wagner-affiliated mill blocker who ran the Gray Zone channel on Telegram. They were all killed on July 27th. Okay, this is the weirdest name for a rebel group I've ever heard. The, quote, Permanent Strategic Framework for Peace, Security, and Development, or CSP-PSD rebel movement. God. Anyway.
Incorporated.
Yeah, incorporated. .com.gov / Africa. Anyway. Rebel movement claimed that, quote, it routed the entire column of Malian army and Russian mercenaries. And the Critical Threats Project covered that situation in a different file I didn't get into too much when I was doing the curating for this information here. I just kind of talked about what they talked about in the Russian segment here. Return to Chip says $10. Thank you for the stream, gentlemen. Thank you very much for the donation.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are able to watch it. Anyway,
Yeah.
God, I was sorry. Side note, guys, there's a lot of stuff going on with me personally. Not a lot of good stuff, a little bit of bad, but that's just life. I'm a little spread thin again, so I get frustrated when things don't work that should work typically, but that's just life. So anyway, that was yesterday. Okay, so social media reportedly showed numerous killed Wagner and Malian personnel, including the body of the administrator of the Gray Zone Telegram channel, Nikita Fedyanin. I almost said Fedyin. Anyway, who reportedly covered Russia's full-scale invasion and has been criticized in the Russian MOD. Sources within Fedyanin's close circle confirmed his death to TASS on the 20th of July. Russian insider source claimed that Wagner losses amounted to 33 killed and 18 wounded, and various Russian sources claimed that the CSP-PSD captured several prisoners, with some speculating that Commander Anton Yelizarov, alias Lotus, was captured. Now, I've heard, God, I'm putting that up in the question mark column there because I've heard he was not captured. I heard he was killed. I heard he's MIA. I heard he's fine. I don't know. So we'll see what happens over time, guys. Like this is just the fog of war. A lot of people are saying he's been killed or captured or MIA. Supposedly, again, we've heard him before during the Wagner coup. He is the guy basically running Wagner now. Wagner split into several factions. Prigozhin's son was being groomed by some other call sign guy. I forgot his name. But yeah, so Anton Yelizarov is basically leading Wagner in Africa right now. So anyway, you got any comments there, Alex?
No.
Okay, I thought you were. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, Russian sources claim that Russian MOD's Africa Corps successfully mediated the prisoner exchange with the CSP-PSD. Russian blogger claimed that Russian MOD paid ransoms for every captured Wagner mercenary except Yelizarov. So maybe he is dead. I don't know. And several other mill bloggers claimed that Yelizarov died in the ambush. ISW said they can't independently verify if he's captured or dead. Lastly, much of the Russian info space response to the recent insurgent ambush of Wagner Group in northern Mali coalesced around the suggestion that the Russian MOD will seek to benefit from Wagner losses, highlighting the continued distrust between them and the Russian MOD. Won't get into the whole thing, but they claim the Russian MOD is gloating over Wagner's losses. Anyway, so they're talking about how the Russian presidential admin wants to deploy the Africa Corps to replace the Wagner troops in the entire Sahelian 3. They're calling that the Sahelian 3 regarding Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Anyway, but the Africa Corps doesn't have enough people, and we've actually seen them operating in Belgorod and Kharkiv Oblast. But this photo right here also has a story of its own. So a couple of details. BBC actually said this was a fake photo. I don't know. There's so much fucking info floating around. They said this photo right here was actually a different flag and that this was edited in. The caveat to that, though, is that this guy is clearly a white guy. Whereas with all these Tuaregs, they're a Berber ethnicity. Sorry. They got all their guns pointed up. Some got their fingers in the trigger well. This guy looks like an SOF operator. Gray shirt, balaclava, white guy hat, and gun pointed down with his index finger above the trigger well.
Is that coming through on the screen share?
Oh, sorry. Goodness me.
Audience side.
Yeah, it's coming through the audience side there. Sorry. Let me get that open.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, no, I'm watching the stream right now, and I just see the headlines slide.
That's a couple minutes slow. The audience is being very patient with the bit rate. It is running, but it's running very slow. So can you see the screen share?
Yeah, it's good. Okay.
Okay, let me show you here. So yeah, this guy right here is what I was talking about. In the middle. And anyway, this is from the
so
post.
There's a big delay then.
Okay, there's a big delay. White Boy Summer was saying he's going to watch 20 seconds behind. It's probably closer to 1 or 2 minutes now. Anyway, it's Odyssey. I don't know. They said they're getting rid of ads though, so I don't know if Odyssey got bought by somebody, but whatever. It is what it is. Okay, so that's Wagner's route, guys, and the last couple of things, the bottom of the stack for the headlines. Zelensky reiterated Ukraine will not compromise its sovereignty and territorial integrity in exchange for a diplomatic resolution to Russia's invasion. Okay, so some pro-Ukraine commentators last week were not panicking, but they were like, what the fuck sort of comment about this, though. Interview with French media, Zelensky stated on the 1st of August that Ukraine is willing to pursue a diplomatic solution with Russia, but the Ukraine will never make territorial concessions to do so. He gave a caveat to that, though. Zelensky emphasized the Ukrainian government does not have the right to unilaterally renounce Ukrainian territory. Okay, not just morally, but like, we can't legally do it. But stating that this would violate the Ukrainian constitution because the decision must be taken into account the will of the Ukrainian people. See where this is going. Zelensky noted the Ukrainian government would have to hold a referendum to formally renounce any territory, but did not suggest the Ukrainian government or population has any interest in or intention to hold such a referendum. Like, that's, I don't know. You can't even write this shit in a book. No one would say, like, guy who wrote Rainbow Six. What the fuck was his name?
Fucking Clancy.
Like Tom Clancy would never what do we do between Russia and Ukraine if they go to a war? Oh yeah, we'll write in a referendum for Russia to take land. I'm like, no one would ever think that. Zelensky came out and said that though. I'm just like own goal, dude. Like what the fuck? Anyway. So he said that because they can't legally do it, they would have to hold a vote essentially for the Ukrainians to give up land. So this dove into a couple of different streamers on YouTube talking about latest poll numbers, right? So the latest poll numbers from I forgot which source. The good of it is that 55% of Ukrainians say they're unwilling to compromise any territory, right? Unfortunately, within the last 2 years, there have been an increasing number of Ukrainians, mainly in the east, which is understandable, from 8 or 9% up to 33% of the total Ukrainian population is now saying they're willing to compromise some territory concessions for peace. That's not unexpected. Again, it's not a majority, it is a big minority. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are understandably war weary in the East. Again, the wording on these polling numbers is what. Again, I don't have all the data in front of me, guys. But the wording in these polls does matter. So, what that piece looks like, how much territory, where the territory is. I'm sure they don't think that their village would want to be taken over. Stuff like that, right? So, who the fuck knows? It could be like, they get to keep the Donbass and Crimea, or they keep Crimea but not the Donbass. Who knows? The actual where the lines would